Hi, Georges Jeanties here. I am a comic illustrator for the past 25 years or so. I've worked on all the titles, ranging from Superman to Spider-Man, from DC to Marvel. I'm now doing Marvel titles, Star Wars. The Mandalorian just finished up, and the Ahsoka series is now coming out. And again, I've been in the business about 25 years, pretty much just telling stories.
Nice. I'm Marc Simon. I'm known mostly as a story artist. I go by the Godfather of Storyboarding, and I've been in the industry now. I started as an art director before I started storyboarding for Spielberg. I've been doing it for about 38 years. I've worked on over 6,000 productions of movie, TV shows, commercials, games, you name it. I've written 13 books on the industry. I produce all the courses on LinkedIn Learning about storyboarding. I wrote the Bible of storyboarding called Storyboards Motion and Art, and I've written curriculums for 5 different universities. I've won an Emmy for helping develop the leading storyboard software, Storyboard Pro. So I've been doing this a long time. One of the things I wanted to show you guys kind of give you an idea of what I do, especially the way I look at storyboarding. I've got a video here that I'll play that I edited my actual storyboards, and I always produce animatics, which is a video storyboard. I add motion to it on every production. I'm able to do it fast enough. So what I did is I actually put my finished storyboards to the final cut, because my goal is always to hit the director's vision. So this little clip here will show you how close I can get, and I always get, to my director's vision. So that gives you an idea. The storyboards that I do are a lot more than just the still images, but they get the still images as well. But my storyboards are also then used in editorial before the final effects and final shots are done, so they're able to cut everything together that much faster. Okay, how'd you like to start?
Well, why don't we start by each of you telling us a little bit about how you like to approach a project as you get it.
Sure. Well, mine, of course, is a little different since I do just static images on paper still. And I do work hard copy. I don't do digital yet. I've been doing it for so long. I prefer to actually put paper to pen to paper and go that route. And I totally accept the digital medium and how it is now, just the forefront. But I've been doing it so long, I haven't. Everyone always asks, well, why don't you work digital? And I don't know, I prefer the actual page, the tactile element to it.
And you can't sell a digital original.
Third market, it's if you got it digital, right, you don't have any originals per se. But I usually actually do approach comic book storytelling as a movie. We pretty much get the same premise. We get a script. In our scripts, though, it's broken down into page 1, panel 2, panel 3, however many panels are on that particular page. And then we go from there, and it's up to the artist to give that one static image that's going to tell whatever that story is. Like if somebody's walking into a room and they're going to be surprised by someone in a closet, and you just have one page to do that, they'll probably have so-and-so walks into a room and looks around, and there's an establishing shot, and there's a woman on the sofa who has a gunshot wound, and he walks towards the back of her, and there's the closet, and he's about to open it, and that's on that particular page. As an artist, you sort of get the beats and the pulse and what's going on with that particular scene. And of course, if the scene extends itself for more than just one page, you encompass all of the pages. So if it's a 5-page scene, hypothetically, you would continue that. Like I said, I like to do more in sense of beats. You'll continue that beat for the whole scene, and it's out of practice. I'm a fan of many comic artists who do this very, very well, or who did this very well. Some are no longer with us. And I just love the medium so much. A lot of people nowadays just want to do covers, and they just want that one cool image. I've always been that guy. I want to tell stories. That's why I got into this business.
It's all about telling the story and drawing. So when I'm working on movies and TV shows, the first thing is getting a full script. Don't give me sides, which are just the sequence I'm storyboarding, because we never storyboard an entire production. We do stunts, effects, special effects, fancy camera moves, and oneers. And then I try, if I'm not familiar with the show, if it's an ongoing series, I watch a few episodes of it, especially recent ones if they're available. And then once I know who the director is, I go through and I find recent things that the director's done in the same genre. Every director is different on how they like to balance the screen, how they like to move the camera. So I literally study every director before I work with them, so that when I sit down with them and I start doing thumbnails with the director, and I do it with the director, I don't do it alone, that I'm already sketching in their visual style. So it's literally copying how they like to tell stories. So I then sit down, and it's usually over Zoom. Almost everything is virtual now. Sometimes it's in person, but 90% of my production work is now virtual. But I started the virtual storyboarding in the industry back 20 some odd years ago. So I was the pioneer of it. So I've got it down to a fine art. We'll sit down, and I'll always ask the director if they have a shot list, send it to me. I talk to locations and set design. I have them send me where we're going to be shooting these sequences. I talk to locations, so I know exactly what vehicles, and I bring in 3D vehicles that, like you saw in the Dexter sample, that's a 3D version of the exact truck that we used, because I want it to be as accurate as possible to what we're seeing. So before I ever meet with the director, I'm already spending a day and a half prepping everything. Not only just reading through everything, but pulling together every aspect. Who's being cast? I talk to wardrobe. What are they wearing? If there's special props in there, I talk to props, send me photos. Sometimes that stuff's not available, but whenever it is, it just makes me be able to provide more accuracy to production on what we need to do. Then I sit down with the director, and we start shot one. How do you want to start it? And I ask 1,000 questions as we're going, but I literally just do quick thumbnails as we're going. So by the time I'm done with my meeting with the director, I already have approvals. So rather than spending 2 or 3 days of this back and forth, I just start doing cleanup. And one of the great things for me is that gives me more time to really play with it and be the illustrator that's in my heart, right? Because normally in storyboarding, we don't have time to do the quality that you do in comic books. But I like doing that kind of stuff, you know? I grew up...
Well, yeah, we're just picking one image. You're doing 7.
Right, but I still want to be able to actually just play with it. You know, the artist in my heart, I have to draw and have fun with it. And then I get to add motion. So like you were talking about story, it's all about story. I love getting into the character. I love, you know, can I tell a joke better by adding this shot? Or, you know, if we frame it up this way, it's going to scare someone more. You know, that type of thing. So then I just have fun adding motion. I add my own sound effects and everything. So because it sells, it sells the action and it sells the humor more when you can actually see it together. And the directors and producers freaking love it. They love seeing it before they shoot it. And it's easier to get approvals. And in fact, I was we were doing a sequence on Snowfall a couple years ago. And it was a really big one because it's not a huge budget show, but we had a tiger that was eating people in it in one episode, and we were going to have ILM do the tiger. But the budget was for 5 shots of the tiger. The director wanted more than that. So when I finished my boards and I did them, you know, really tight like I like to do it with all the motion and everything, the producer looked at it and go, yeah, we have to have all these shots and double the budget right there, just because of my storyboards. And they ended up getting 10 shots to really tell the sequence in the best way possible, because it inspired everyone so much with what I was able to provide.
Wow, that's amazing, both of you. I wanted to ask, how did both of you end up in your respective fields?
Me as a kid, you know, I think every kid picks up a comic book at some point in their lives, and you just never leave that world. In my case, for me, you realize, you know, when you're a kid, you draw all the time. Even if you're never going to be an artist, you're a kid, you usually draw. And I think those kids who find that they have some talent stick with it, even when you grow up and you start to see girls in a different way. You still draw if you're an artist, I usually say. And I just never left that ability. And again, people said you were pretty good, so I just kept with it. And reading the stuff that I loved and thinking that I could actually contribute and be a part of it, that to me was the inspiration, and still inspires me today to do comic books. It's not the accolades or anything like that. It's just the satisfaction of representing something that meant so much to me when I was that just reader with paper in hand.
So who were some of your inspirations?
Growing up, I mean, obviously the classics. You had your Jack Kirbys, your Neil Adams. I had those vanguard guys like Michael Golden and Alan Davis. John Byrne was a huge influence. Yeah. Frank Miller, probably the best storyteller in comic books back in the day, was very influential on me. And Gene Colan, yeah, on Tomb of Dracula, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of those guys did storyboards too back in the day. So it was very much a synergistic medium when it was just pen on paper and you didn't have the computer to do it. A lot of these guys would moonlight as a storyboard artist.
Well, Neil Adams owned Continuity,
he had his own
studios, which did extremely high-end storyboards and animatics.
They would do comics, magazines, anything you brought to them visually, they could do.
Yeah, that stuff was absolutely incredible. For me, again, I grew up drawing. I was, you know, I was an editorial cartoonist for a while. I was a syndicated cartoonist for a while, and it was just always drawing. And as I was graduating college, I thought, hey, Hollywood sounds cool. And I had also, I was superintendent of a large custom home building company when I was a teenager. That's how I paid my way through school, and so I knew how to design and build for real. I figured, well, that's my way into Hollywood, is designing sets. So I actually got my first job in Hollywood was designing sets for Roger Corman at Corman Studio on a movie called Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity. And in 2 weeks in, I became the art director. And I just went art directing, and then production designing on a lot of movies and TV shows and commercials. And I started seeing storyboards come across my desk, obviously. And I thought, wow, that's a lot more drawing than what I'm doing. And I started to miss drawing. And the big quake hit Frisco And I had met my wife working at HBO, and so she said, we have to get out of this hellhole. And so we moved to Orlando because we heard Orlando was growing in production. This is back in 1989. And Nickelodeon was just opening up. So my wife got hired right away as a UPM and producer. And a week later, I started as the second designer at Nickelodeon when it went national. So I was doing that for a while, and I was art directing, but I was also storyboarding everything at Nick, all the live action productions. And Spielberg came into town with Sequest. I don't know if you remember that old show, the futuristic submarine, and we called it Star Trek Underwater, to the chagrin of the producers.
Well, they call it Wet Trek.
Yeah. And I wanted to be on that show because it's Spielberg, it's sci-fi, and biggest show on TV at the time on NBC. So I literally just walked over and talked to everyone I could, and 15 minutes later I got hired. And I was a story artist, and it was at that moment that I went full-time storyboarding. I've never gone back. So that was just freaking dream come true in every possible way. In fact, I even drew a comic book parody. It's like a Mad Magazine parody of Sequest in between episodes when I was working on it. That was just a lot of fun to do. So, yeah.
And what would you say are some of the more trying difficulties when you have to work with a director who might not know exactly what they want, or you have a script that doesn't have exactly what should be on the page? What are some of the difficulties that you have to overcome in those situations?
Well, for me, it's just that. Usually working with somebody else, you're working with somebody else's vision as well. And I hear this cliche all the time. It's like, well, I'm not an artist, but this is what I want. And they try to explain it to you, but again, not being an artist, try to explain something to somebody that you're like, well, I don't visually know how to interpret this, but I want you to interpret this from what I'm telling you. So from there, you sort of have to make up what you think they want. And I've worked with a bunch of comic writers, and I've worked with a bunch of movie writers as well. I did Buffy the Vampire Slayer with Joss Whedon for a number of years. And the good thing about that is that he was a comic book fan as well, so he understood the medium. And when we talked, it was very synergistic. I worked with a few other Hollywood writers, and they were just, well, I'm writing a teleplay. This is what they're telling me to do, to write a teleplay, because that's the closest thing to a comic book. So essentially, what I would get is just maybe a line of direction and then the dialogue. And then from there, as an artist and a storyteller, I would then have to compose how that would approach on a page. And in storytelling, there's always a flow. When it's just a static image, there should be a flow that you're doing as a part to storyboards, because storyboards, you don't necessarily design a page. You just go from one panel to another. And with a comic, you have this page where on an average there may be 5 panels, 6, 7, whatever, and you have to develop a sort of a design sense to it. And most non-comic writing people will just usually say, these are the words, this is the direction, have at it, which a lot of people enjoy because it does give you a sense of freedom, because you can then compose the way you want to compose it. But a lot of that too is you second guessing that person who says, I don't know what I want visually, so I'm going to describe this to you and hopefully we can come to a meeting of the minds. So that can be trying at times, where you do this and they're like, no, that's not right, or no, that's not right. And you're going, well, I'm just going from your direction, so if it's not right, tell me what you want, type of a thing. Thankfully, I don't experience that very often. A lot of people who come into the comic book medium anyway are very understanding. I'm the writer, you're the artist. I'm not going to try and tell you how to draw. So that freedom has been afforded to me more often than not, but yeah, every now and again. With the Star Wars stuff, while it's not a headache in essence, Star Wars is very picky, and they have a franchise, that's kind of popular. So they are very particular about what you do. So anything you do in there that's not Star Wars, there's sort of quality control, and somebody is going to call you out. Whenever I do a page or a book even and send it in, there are always notes, and it is sometimes the most egregious notes you can think of, like, this person's mouth wouldn't be smiling at this moment, or, the upturn here, or silly little things like the background person who nobody's going to see once this book is published, they don't like what they're wearing, or something like that. So with Star Wars anyway, it's very, very picky and can be frustrating, but as a professional, you just understand that's part of the job. You don't take it personal.
Things being a hardship is also sometimes just the way you look at it. I know a lot of story artists complain when a director is very specific on what they want. I love it when a director has a vision. I find it a great challenge to be able to capture, as you saw in that sample video, a director's vision. Now, that doesn't mean that my hand's not in it. Over the years, I've learned a lot of tricks on how to get my influence in without taking over. It's one thing if I'm directing something and I'm also storyboarding it, then it's however I see it. But to add my influence and my style in with a director's vision and make it all work together, that's a fun challenge. So I don't look at that as a hardship. I love it. I think it's really fun to do it that way, which makes my life a lot better than just bitching and moaning all the time when I'm really enjoying it. Now, there are times when a director comes in, especially on these hour-long shows, and they hadn't worked on the show before. They come in for the first time, and they're not properly prepared. They don't really know what they want, but we have to storyboard it so that production knows what they're going to do. You can't budget or schedule and plan for things unless there's a visual blueprint. My storyboards are the blueprint for all 700 crew members to follow. So there are times like that. If it's someone who's not prepared, hopefully production knows, and they'll have the director of photography come in and sit with us, and the DP and I break it down, and the director's just sitting there nodding. Or I'll say, all right, so I assume you want to start with this kind of shot, and I'll just start sketching stuff out. So I'm asking them, I'm sure you want to do it this way. So rather than saying, I think we should do it this way, so that they can still feel that there's some authorship. And then generally we get some back and forth going, but there's always that play of, I know my role as a story artist, so I'm going to help influence and help make it better without taking over, unless there's nothing there in the meantime. And there's sometimes where there was an episode on Walking Dead where the director, he was super busy, he was also a producer, and said, I want this big war zone. It's when Hilltop was being overrun by zombies, and he wanted to look like a war zone. And so we sat for about 30 minutes and just watched the opening to Saving Private Ryan. And he was pointing out, see the foreground, see the background, see how this is happening. I want this kind of feel for the zombies going through. They're going to come through in these areas here. And then he ran off to other meetings. It's like, got it. So then I'm sketching everything out, and I keep everything in real rough form. And then I would sit with him again, and then he would say, well, I love this, don't like that, and then I'd go and do my finishes from there. So that's also fun when you get free reign, just to kind of go and creatively figure it out. There's not a whole lot of bad parts of the industry. Look, I get to tell stories, I get to draw in black and white. I'm partially colorblind, so I don't like working in color anyway, so I don't have to. I could see red for blood, which is really all that really matters. Everything else is black and white and gray tone. So, life is pretty great.
Real quick before I keep traveling on with my questions, because I think you guys want to ask anything?
There's no way a guy wearing an X-Men shirt does not have questions for Georges.
Just taking it all in.
Yeah.
So for an action sequence, you have a script. How much do you work with the fight choreographer? Because they're going to have a lot of input in terms of how that actually happens.
It's a lot of back and forth, and every production is different. A lot of times, I'm working with the director on the director's vision before the stunt guys start working out something. So they'll use my storyboards as their launching pad, and they figure out how to do it, and then they enhance it. Other times, like I just finished working on the new Blade Runner series that's coming out. And on that one, stunts were ahead. So I would get the stunt previs video, And then the director wanted it cut a certain way. So I would use their action, but the director's angles and camera movements. So I would restage their action, but keeping their action. And then there are times on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, there was one where the director had a vision of what she wanted, and it was a oneer going through this S-curve tunnel. And she was explaining how, coming up, and we're behind, following these characters, turn a corner, there's a bad guy there, and there's this fight, he throws them up against this wall, back and forth, and all this wonder all the way through, and I said, okay, just shoot it with no people, just, you're the camera, take your iPhone and just shoot it, and give me the video file. That way I've got the perfect action. So I just took her video file, I put it into my software, and then I storyboarded over that. So it's exactly her timing, her camera move and everything, and I just storyboarded the action over that. And it came out exactly the same, and Lily Stunties just followed that because she had such a specific vision. So it varies. So, and sometimes the stunt coordinator will be in the meeting with the director and I, and then we'll all work it out together. So it's anything and everything, which is also part of what's fun. I can't get bored. Every production, every shot is different. I might be doing, 1,000 zombie shots, which I have. I've done 9 seasons in the Walking Dead universe. But every director has a different way of doing it. All the zombies act differently. There's different shots, different scripts, different characters and how they react. So I'm never drawing the same thing twice. So, but yeah, stunts are always different. Now, and so for you, how often are specific actions really detailed in the scripts?
Really, it's almost like animation where you do the key frames and the writer is saying, okay, this is where I want you to start. They come in through a door and they start fighting. And a lot of them will just leave that action up to you and saying at the end of these 2 pages, they're going to end up in the alley in the back. And unless there's some sort of a MacGuffin or something they actually have to do, they usually leave it up to you, saying, I can storyboard it as if I want, but again, you're the storyteller, so if you can take these 2 pages and give me a really cool fight sequence, this is where we start, and then this is where we end up, in the alley. So they're usually pretty good. And yeah, as a storyteller, you're like, oh, okay, great, I get to inject what I feel would happen in this fight and, make it cool and interesting.
All right, so I got a story about that. So again, it's another Walking Dead, but it was really fun. So there's this one sequence in, I think it was season 10, where a satellite falls into the forest right outside of where our hero crews are living, and it starts a forest fire. And they had obviously primitive tools, and so props sent me photos of all the tools that they had. They had wagons of sand and buckets, and they had kind of like big mops, but with rubber ends on it to tamp out fires and stuff like that. So there's a whole series of tools that they had with them. And the director said, look, we went through the first part of the sequence, the setup, and he goes, all right, I got to go to another meeting. You know what all the tools are that they have. Come up with a couple new ways of killing zombies we've never done before with these new tools. I'll see you in 15 minutes. How fun is that, where I get to create new ways of killing zombies? And I remember, one of them that ended up was taking a big bucket of sand, swinging it over, and crushing the head down into the shoulders. And then to see it actually come out is cool. So, stuff like that is just so fun. Yeah.
What are some of the tools you like to use to bring life to what might be considered lifeless scenes? Like, it's just a walking scene where somebody's giving dialogue, or you have to make a body on the ground interesting for 30 seconds. If there's very little going on, what are some of the things you like to add to it?
And I'm going to add to that for you.
Mm.
Are you influenced by different Star Wars movies or shows with how the visuals are shown?
Shown in what way? Like,
Some high angles or low angles,
Oh.
or, things like that. Do you use that as inspiration when you're figuring out how to do these static?
I'm sure it's more osmosis. I don't consciously think of it, but you've seen so much of it. How can it not permeate what you do? In the comic field, in general, there is, you'll have those scenes where, and a lot of artists just call them boring scenes because, yeah, you've got two people talking and there's nothing going on. So it's very difficult to make that interesting in, again, static images. But it's information, and the reader needs to know this information. So it's very important nonetheless, but unfortunately very boring as well. There's this, for years, there was this paper floating around, this little art paper from an artist, Wally Wood, who was one of the founding fathers of the comic industry. And it says, Wally Wood's 22 panels that always work. And in parentheses it said, or when the writer is just too lazy to actually make something very interesting happen. And literally, he had put two people in these 22 panels in various angles, saying if you ever get caught of a couple of pages or however many pages you have to do, these are the angles that can help you out, mostly if you're at a loss as to what to do. Because, sure, some writers will say, this is a situation where the gag pays off if it's always a static image. So some of them would want them, if you're sitting at a table, don't deviate. Every panel will be these two people talking at a table. So if there's 4 panels on a page, each panel is the both of them. And that can work as well, because a lot of the times it's just the dialogue rather than what's going on. But if the writer is saying, hey, this is just what I thought about, they're walking through a park and there's no necessary image that I want to focus on, feel free to tell that story how you want. You know, that's where you become a fancy director, and you can say, well, I've got a high angle and you've got an unlimited budget, and I can do a low angle, and I can do a worm's eye or a bird's eye view or anything like that. You can, interject, let's say they're in New York City, and you can draw all these fancy buildings or the cars or things like that, and still keep these two people who are walking and talking in your frame and doing what you do, but you do it a little more interesting. So those cases, it's a little more work, and a lot of people seem not to like that, but I look at it as a challenge when there are those boring pages that you then have to make interesting.
Yeah, in film and TV, we call those walk and talks. And how I draw them out really depends on the visual style of that show or that movie. I can't deviate from the setup. Sometimes you don't have high-angle shots. There's not that type of thing. But you still want to make it interesting. When I'm doing my animatics, I have my background layer separate, and I just literally slide it behind it. So in the animatic, you actually see it moving. Kind of like your Wally Wood thing. In film and TV, mostly animation, we have the same thing. It was done by Brad Bird. There's a PDF that he put together when he was head of story on The Simpsons on interesting framing. So, depending on how you're representing the character, you might want to, it's usually lowering the horizon, right, so the characters are bigger. Or it's how you frame the character so that the most important character in that sequence is the one that you're looking up at the most, or it's most prominent in frame. So how do you move them around so you're also visually telling the story of what's interesting? Or even if a character is alone. If you really want to show a character that's alone, generally, it's going to be slightly high angle, and they're small in a kind of an open area. So you're representing visually their loneliness in something. So we're always trying to say, all right, so what does the scene mean? So how do we visually represent that so that even without reading the dialogue or hearing the dialogue in film and TV, that you still understand the meaning of what's happening there. So there's also reading between the lines on how we're coming up with the different types of shots.
Going back to working with different directors,
Mm-hmm.
you both talked about working within a person's individual vision. Doing that and being able to collaborate takes a lot of confidence in your own abilities. How long did it take you to get that level of confidence, and do you still sometimes struggle with that?
As any of my family members or friends will tell you, I do not have a lack of confidence. Mostly it came from, I was a champion skateboarder when I was 12. I had my own line of skateboards. And then I took over as superintendent of a large company when I was 13. I owned my first company when I was 17. So I built an early confidence that's just always stayed with me, so I've never struggled with that. That said, the hour or two before I sit on a new production with a new director, there's always that, God, am I really going to be able to do this? Until I sit down with someone, and the moment one of us says the first thing, I don't think about anything other than, this is fucking cool and I'm doing it. So there's like that initial stage fright right before you walk through the door, right before you walk on stage. But it's only that moment. That's the only time I'll feel it. Never when I'm working, and never in between things. It's just, I've never worked with this person. But if a director I've worked with before, it's like, I can't wait to see them again, so.
Yeah, there's always people you want to work with and people you idolize in the business, and certainly my business. In reference to movies and TV, I was aware of Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a part of pop culture, but I actually never saw an episode. So when I started to work with Joss Whedon, I knew who he was, but I was not in awe of the greatness of what he had done. So I think had I had that, I would have been a little more intimidated when I started to work with him. But as such, I only realized that later when I started to do conventions. This was about 10, 12 years ago, and they still had Buffy conventions. And everyone was like, oh my God, you worked with Joss. There was that glow and gleam in their eyes, and I'm always like, yeah, he's just a regular guy, He's got a hole in his shirt when we were sitting down, he's just this very affable gentleman. And they obviously, you always idolize your heroes, and they're always, this is the guy, he created my childhood, or something like that. And I come into a project, usually, if I have that, I'll try and get rid of that early and not try to idolize the person, because we are still fans. And in Joss's case, I was a fan, but I wasn't the fan to the degree that he was probably known for. And there were a few other people, mostly in the comic business, when I either met them or got a chance to work with them, I was a little nervous. And yeah, you do have that imposter syndrome. Can I do this? Because this is the guy I was mimicking when I was still coming up, and this is the person. If he says this looks awful, that's it. That's going to ruin my whole day. I may just quit the business altogether. So I think a lot of that is just your own emotional state of mind. Because at the end of the day, yeah, people are people. They put their pants on one leg at a time, and that whole cliche. So the idolizing persons, I think really you just don't do it after a while, because you're here to do a job, and you're both trying to do that job to the best of the ability, and that's what you're there for. So your reputation, my reputation, has no consequence.
Yeah, you're working together.
And you work together, hopefully.
Yeah.
All the way in the back, anyone? Oh, you got, God, there's so many people here, that's why. Sorry, guys.
Now I'm trying to think of what I was just thinking of.
Blue.
The great color. Talking about learning by copying people and learning simply by you just always did it. What are the kinds of education what kind of education would you tell a director, like, I can obviously do this, let's not look at the massive body of work that you now have, but what would you have presented before you had that body of work?
You mean in order to get a job? Well, for storyboarding, do storyboards. I mean, you just find a script. They're all over the internet, or find a person. Most people know someone who's writing something who would love to see it. If you're not a writer yourself, don't copy something that's already been done, because any of those of us in the industry will just look at that and go, well, you didn't really create anything, you're just copying something. But create samples, short samples, but storyboard a sequence. that's what I did. And when I first wanted to get into storyboarding, I went to the biggest agency in the world. At the time, it was called Storyboards Inc. And I just walked in the front door, asked to speak to someone. I sat down with an agent, showed him my samples, and he said, "It's terrible. Everything's done wrong. That's not how the industry works at all." I went, "Great, show me how it works." So he gave me a couple samples, some of the people they represented, and I came back a week later with new samples. He goes, "Better, awful, but better. Here's some other stuff." And I just showed up literally every week with new samples until he said, "Yeah, it looks pretty good. Want a Honda commercial?" And just started placing me. So you build a portfolio, and hopefully every job you do, and I'm sure it's the same with comics, my latest project better be better than the last one that I did. So I'm always getting rid of my old stuff. You clear out the old crap, and so every project you're putting new things in your portfolio, or now on the website, to be able to showcase. So you do it. You can talk to your blue in the face, doesn't mean anything. You actually have to show it.
Yeah, and for comics, very much the same way. Although instead, with storyboards, I had learned that somebody had told me, if you do 5-page submissions, do something that tells a story in 5 pages, because within those 5 pages, you should be able to tell a story, whether it's Spider-Man coming in to save Mary Jane from the Green Goblin, and them taking a fight out into Greater Manhattan. You should be able to do that in 5 pages. And yes, every 6 months or so, I would do another set of 5-page submissions, not necessarily of Spider-Man, but something in the comic industry. And in theory, you hopefully would be better than the last 5 pages that you did. And showing these pages to editors at the time, comic book editors, they obviously, this is their business and they know what they're looking for. They can very easily look at what you do and understand, yes, you know how to tell a story, or yes, you know perspective, or yes, you know how to draw the human figure. All of these things are incorporated when you're doing your stuff for comic books. And for me, God, it took me, when I got serious, about 10 years before I could really get to a point where somebody said, "Yeah, all right, here, I'll give you a job." There was always that, "Oh yeah, you're right there, you're so close, you're getting better. Oh, if only I had something to give you right now," that type of thing. And it wasn't until about 10 years later. So within those 10 years, I had all these other jobs, but it wasn't about till 10 years later that I could actually quit all those jobs and just do comic books exclusively. So it is, a lot of people assume, well, if I'm really good and I know what I'm doing, a job will just come down from the heavens like Monty Python and land on me, and I'll be great from here on. It's a struggle. It's a struggle more so, and I don't know if this applies to you, but we're freelance. I've never actually had a job my whole life until after I started drawing comics, because I'm a freelance, which just means I have a job for however long this project is. Once this project is over, I should be able to have lined up another job if I still want to be in this business. So for the last 25 years, that's what I've been able to do. And a lot of people don't like that uncertainty. They want no, I want to know that there's a paycheck there every month, every year, wherever I work. And with comic books, that's the first thing I tell up-and-comers. There's no security. There is no job security in this. Even if you're good, even if you've done an X-Men book or whatever, this is something where it is beholden upon you to get the next job. And you should always know, I say in a general form, 3 months outside of your last project, what you're going to be doing for your next project, because you need to make sure you have a buffer between that time.
It really depends on the person. I'm always overlapping projects, so I never have a gap. With the exception of COVID, or the strike, I've never been not working. And that's 38 years going. So, like right now, I've got 5 shows in movies concurrently going. And it's a lot of late nights because I'm doubling up a lot of days. I do daytime on one, nighttime on another, working through the weekends. And sometimes, and a lot of them aren't full time. I might do 2 or 3 days this week on the waterfront, one of the shows I'm doing, and then I'll do another 3 or 4 days on the new Dexter series, which I'm also doing. And then they might have a break, and I'm about to start the new Scream movie. In the meantime, I've also got some commercials. I've got other artists who work for me, and so I give them the commercials, or I'll do the breakdowns, they'll do the cleanups. So I'm able to double up or triple up on a lot of things because I have other people who support me. doing it. But one thing I don't run into that you probably do, which I'd be really interested in hearing, is style, when you get notes on style. Because in storyboarding, it doesn't really matter what your style is. It's all about the ability to tell the story, because sometimes what we draw is crap because we have such a limited amount of time. You, on the other hand, you have to tell a great story, and it needs to fulfill the kind of look that the editors at that time are looking for.
Yeah, back in the day, Marvel wanted very much a Kirby style because that was the house style of the time that differentiated it from DC Comics. And that used to be very important. Once the late 80s and 90s came around, style was more of a signature. And people were getting their own styles and sure, they were still being influenced by John Byrne or Neil Adams or whomever, but that style now was more accepted. You didn't have to have a certain style to draw a certain way because people were, I guess, celebrating that diversity. And that's not to say that certain companies don't have a style, because you can take 10 comics from Marvel right now and look at them and see that there is a commonality. I don't know if it would be a style, but there is a commonality between all of those books. And that is, like you were saying, the thing that is for right now, the very popular element. Whatever that style is, it does permeate a lot of these books that are coming out, just as DC has they won't say we have a style and this is how you have to draw, but you can take 10 of their books and say, yeah, you guys have a certain style that either it's acknowledged or not, but it is there. So it isn't the end-all be-all, and if you have a nice style, that's great. Nowadays, unfortunately, it's that style is pretty much kept to the cover because there's so much to do about covers now. There's covers, just with The Mandalorian that I did, for the first issue, there were 20 separate covers. There were variant covers. So everyone was so caught up on collecting covers. I began to sit down and go, does anybody actually read the interior? Because everybody seems to want the covers, and nobody cares about the interiors. So unfortunately, that seems to be where the pendulum is swinging nowadays, where it's all about the flash of the cover, and the substance of the interior seems to get lost for some reason.
I've heard from some other of my comic friends about, especially guys who've been doing it for a long time, where an editor say, well, your style is really more old-fashioned and we're looking more for a newer thing. So there is some of that, even if it's just in the eye of the editor, but they're the ones who hire you.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's why I say you pick up 10 books from any company where they don't say, well, we don't have a style, we just want to see how good you are. But you'll look at it and go, no, you actually do have a style, whether or not you want to acknowledge it. So I would say anybody who is trying to do this sort of thing professionally, pick up a certain number of books from that company you're interested in and see what it is. And if you are not anywhere near what they're publishing, you'll probably have a hard time getting on that book. Like if you want to draw Spider-Man or Superman or whomever, look at what's being published, because that's, like you were saying, that's what the editors, the persons who hire you, that's definitely what they've been looking at.
Yeah, great note.
We've got 10 minutes left.
Good.
What would you say of your past projects, numerous as they are, what's been your baby? Like, what is the thing, like, no matter what, I have this with me, I can die happy. Or is it just whatever's bigger and better coming in?
Like that we've actually done?
Yeah.
Or?
I get this question all the time, and it's always so hard to answer. It's hard to answer because I love what I do. So literally whatever I'm drawing on right now is what my heart and soul is in. There's certain things I always look back at, and some of them I look at in different ways. I mean, I still have a spot in my heart from Sequest. I mean, that's where I got my start, and it was Spielberg. You know, how could you not love that? I was a huge Walking Dead fan before I moved to Atlanta. My goal was, when I moved here, was to work on The Walking Dead, and I landed it 3 months before I closed on my house. So, you know, I started, my first job in Atlanta was Walking Dead. So, and that just kind of keeps raising its head all the time. Same thing with Stranger Things. Love Stranger Things, and I ended up landing on that. So, you know, there's certain shows or movies or franchises that you're a fan of, and then when you get it, it's like, holy shit, this is cool. And those always say, but then there's ones that aren't necessarily something you look forward to, but you have good memory, like The Waterboy, if you remember that, the old Adam Sandler. I was the story artist on that, and I also designed all the team logos, all that kind of stuff on it. And that was a god-awful script. I hated it. I didn't see the humor. And I'm placing the blame on me, because when I saw the movie, I laughed my ass off the entire way. It's absolutely hysterical. I didn't see the humor that the director did. He saw it and was able to get great stuff out of it. So my memory of that is great because how I had to shift my thinking about it, because I'm working on things. Oh, yeah, where's the humor in this? This is kind of stupid. To laughing, I'm pretty damn proud to be a part of it because it was really funny. See, you end up being proud for different reasons for different projects.
Yeah, always the same way. While I wasn't a fan of Buffy when I got the gig, I then started watching all the DVDs because I came late to that particular party, and I became a fan, and I'm still a fan. So it was very gratifying to know that I added to the lexicon of this franchise that really is going to outlive us all. So I was very happy to do that. And then, like you said, there are those smaller projects that I did, a lot of independent projects that nobody would really know, but the type of story you were telling and the subject matter a lot of the times resonates with you for different reasons and for personal reasons. And a lot of the smaller stuff that I've done really resonates with me because it is, I'm all about, I don't care what you write, just say something. In what you're doing, give me some sort of either a moral clause or just something that I can take with me rather than, oh, wasn't it cool to see Spider-Man fighting the Green Goblin in this issue and him beating him at the end. No, that's not cool. The moral element or the story you're trying to tell, that to me is what's going to stay with me, because that's what stayed with me when I was younger. A lot of the comics that I read, there are a handful of books that stayed with me because they were actually telling you something instead of just trying to get you from issue 12 to 13 to 14. So I'm very much, if I have anything that I think special, and even when I do comic, because I write and draw comics myself, I'm always trying to say, what am I trying to say here?
And of the things that aren't under NDAs, what are you excited about that's coming out for you?
Well, I have an Ahsoka series from Marvel Lucasfilm right now that should be coming out through the end of the year. And I've got a bunch of creator-owned projects that I've been telling myself forever I was going to do it. And funny enough, when right before COVID hit, I was saying to myself, all right, I'm going to do my own stuff. I'm going to start it. I've got all these projects that have just been sitting there for 10 years, and then that's when Star Wars called. And there's an edict. I don't know if they do it in storyboards, but it's an edict to say you don't say no to Star Wars. So in doing that, I put all my stuff to the side and said, yes. And for the last 4 years, it's been nothing but Star Wars because they keep offering me things, and I keep having that ringing in my head, well, you don't say no to Star Wars. So right now, there's a lull, and I'm hoping it's enough lull that I can put in my own stuff.
Bad Monkey is one of the most recent things I did, so I was so glad to see that finally come out and doing really well, so that's really cool. The most upcoming that I'm probably most excited about is Blade Runner, because being a huge Blade Runner fan of both the movies, that's going to be really exciting. And I can't say anything about it other than it's just freaking cool. I've been part of the Dexter universe for 15 years now. I did the original pilot and I did the whole last series. And I just picked up the most recent, so I've been working on that for the last month or so. So, Dexter Resurrection is going to be another cool one, and it's a fun project because I like the directors. The directors are really fun to work with, and I know the character obviously really well. So, but there's always more. There's always the next thing. But those are really fun to work on. Question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, appreciate panel, and we're seeing production companies hiring more pre-visualization people out of the game industry. They want to
Mhm.
for their previs. But a lot of these folks don't have experience dealing with storyboards.
Mhm.
So is there anything they should be asking you when they get the board and starting a more interactive previs for the director? Anything they can know? Anything would make the process easier for them or let them understand what you've done more effectively?
We don't really look at it that way. I mean, most of the time, previs happens after I've done the storyboards, and then because they don't know what to create and what to build until literally the visualization starts with me as the story, or whoever is the story artist on it. Every once in a while, there's a project where previs is done by a different team, even before the director comes on. So one of my recent projects, I can't talk about which one, but one of my recent ones, they did previs beforehand. And the director would have it and would share it with me. So I'm just showing you this to show you the location and some of the action, but this is not all how we're going to shoot it. So for me, it was just so I could see where it is, and then I would sit with the director and we would board it out properly. And the way I do my storyboards, it ends up looking a lot like previs anyway because I add so much motion, and if there's a big 3D complex camera shot, I do that in my storyboarding. A lot of times I end up redoing it the way the director wants it. And that's not to say it's a battle, because what they did helped the director and helped me understand where we are and what some of the action is going to be. And now the directing happens. And so I work with the director and we break it down on how the crew's actually going to do it. Sometimes previs go back and make changes. It kind of depends on the complexity, because a lot of times previs is actually done more for figuring out what kind of camera equipment do we need and where's it going to fit in and that kind of stuff. But generally, even if they've done previs, they're going to put my storyboards in the edit bay, not the previs, because my storyboards are more accurate. So, but yeah, they should just listen to me.
That puts us at just about time, guys.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the questions.